Rankings, rest of season rankings. Today I'm bringing you my rest of season rankings for each and every position, and we're starting it off with the running backs, and we started off in this S tier, and we got Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Joe Mixon. Shout out to Joe Mixon for entering into this overall S tier elite level group of running backs. Hopefully you have one of these guys. Maybe you're even lucky enough to have two of these guys. Absolutely love where we're sitting here in the S tier. We could go dive into a little bit deeper about why I have each guy here, but really I have a top two of Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, and then pretty much running backs 3 through running backs 6 and 7. I think you can definitely debate that. We move on to the A tier, and we start off this A tier with Kyron Williams, Devon Achane, Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor. Big thing we want to hit on in this tier is Alvin Kamara has fallen down just based on Derek Carr being injured and the performance the last 2 weeks. Kenneth Walker, I still feel very good here in the A tier. We had him in the S tier in our last rest of season rankings video 2 weeks ago. Definitely got pushed down, got overtaken by Joe Mixon coming back, but we do have CMC. We got Jonathan Taylor. I think the Joe Flacco, as much as that sucks for Anthony Richardson, that's definitely going to help out Jonathan Taylor in this Indianapolis Colts offense. Then we got CMC going to be returning after the bye. We'll have to see how he ends up performing here in the overall A tier. We move on to the B tier, and we started off with our man Aaron Jones, James Conner, Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, J.K. Dobbins. In this tier, I do want to hit on the fact that Brian Robinson, James Conner, Aaron Jones are kind of all there together for me. I know we put out a video and a lot of people were not happy with where we were talking about James Conner earlier. I still feel very confident here with him as our running back 15 rest of season. So got to feel good about our B tier. Hopefully, like I said, you guys got 2 or 3 guys here in the S, A, B tier, especially as we continue on in these rankings. We move on to the C tier, and the C tier is a little bit smaller for me. We got Chase Brown, Ramondre Stevenson, Javonte, Tyrone Tracy. Shout out to Tyrone Tracy for making an absolute up the overall rankings. Najee Harris, Kareem Hunt. We've absolutely loved Kareem Hunt's kind of been a league winner for you over these last few weeks, but we got Isaiah Pacheco going to be returning off of that injury over the next 2 weeks, so definitely need to be considering Kareem Hunt as maybe potentially a trade away if you can get some value. If you can get like a Najee Harris, a Tyrone Tracy, a Javonte Williams for him, I'm sure going to be trading away because I think there's a little bit more value. But if you like to continue to roll in those fantasy football points, and maybe you're like, hey, Caleb, Isaiah Pacheco isn't going to return as soon as we think and be the type of bell cow that's going to take away from Kareem Hunt, I hear you on that. We move on to the D tier, and Chuba Hubbard got pushed down this week because we do have, like I said, recording this on Wednesday, Jonathan Brooks has not been activated off of IR. So there's a chance that Chuba Hubbard right now is potentially a great buy low candidate, just based on the fact that what if Jonathan Brooks doesn't play this season? I think he's a great trade buy low candidate, because if he were to hit, I think Jonathan Brooks being a second round running back could definitely be someone that we're looking at in weeks 12 through weeks 13, absolutely helping your fantasy football roster. But Chuba Hubbard also is a great opportunity to buy. So definitely be going and seeing what Chuba Hubbard could do for you. We got Rashad White, Nick Chubb, Rico Dowdle, Tank Bigsby, Jordan Mason, Travis Etienne, Zach Moss, and then Jonathan Brooks, rounding out my overall RB rankings for rest of the season. We move over to the wide receivers, and we started off here in the S tier. We got Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Malik Nabers. And this is the same list that I had from a few weeks ago. I think if you wanted to debate Malik Nabers potentially being the S tier, I understand, but I still like Malik Nabers the way that he's been performing. Maybe there is like a clear tier of 5, and then maybe Malik Nabers, even though I have him as a wide receiver 6, should be pushed down. But I definitely think we need to be considering this as our clear S tier. Hopefully, maybe you've got 2 guys. I got a team with Jamar Chase and Malik Nabers. So if you have that, definitely feel like you're going to be 11 where you're at. We move on to the A tier, and we got Drake London, Drizzy Drake starting off the tier. It's been an absolute great year with him with Kirk Cousins. Tyreek Hill, now that he has Tua Tagovailoa back, boosting him back up the rankings. We saw Puka Nacua come off that injury maybe, a week earlier than I thought he was going to come back, and absolutely lighted up. So love Puka Nacua here. We're still waiting on Nico Collins to come back, but Nico Collins, if you look at his overall fantasy points this season, he's still up there as a top 15 wide receiver after missing all these games, which is huge. Tells you how good of a points per game advantage Nico Collins was. Scary Terry with Jaden Daniels, and then Brian Thomas Jr., who I absolutely continue to love rest of season. Even though this Jacksonville Jaguars team is stinking it up, you got to be considering some Brian Thomas Jr. He might not play this week, but in rest of season rankings, feel very confident with Brian Thomas Jr. We move on to the B tier, and we started off with Cooper Kupp. And if you're going to argue with me that Cooper Kupp should be in the A tier, I will be open to that argument. Like I said, I think tiers more than anything to me is not necessarily like, I try to keep them pretty even, but at the beginning and end of tiers, sometimes they're a lot closer than a lot of people like to think. So if you're in the comments, let me know where you think Cooper Kupp should be ranked. But then Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, who I still think Chris Olave is a great trade candidate because I've seen a lot of people be able to flip Chris Olave for a guy like a Cooper Kupp. So definitely be exploring that if you can, but Chris Olave definitely continues to be a high-end wide receiver too. Garrett Wilson looked like he might be slightly dead once Devontae Adams got added, but Garrett Wilson has put up a nice last 2 weeks. So I have to feel good about Garrett Wilson here in the B tier, and then rounding it out with DK Metcalf. We move on to the C tier. We got Deebo Samuel, who is the clear one for the 49ers now that Brandon Ayuk is hurt. So definitely got to be considering some Deebo. Marvin Harrison Jr., T. Higgins has been battling injuries all season. Came back, had a nice little stretch, was out last week. Hopefully we get T. Higgins back this week. DJ Moore, Zay Flowers now with Deontay Johnson in stow. Maybe you could make the argument that Amari Cooper and Devontae Adams should be ahead of Zay Flowers, but I kind of have these guys all in a bit of a mini tier within the C tier at the back end for our wide receiver department. We move on to the D tier. We got George Pickens, Tank Dell, Mike Evans, hopefully returning off of injury sooner rather than later. We do want him to get healthy. Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson now enters the town for the Baltimore Ravens, and maybe you should make the argument that Deontay Johnson should be a little bit closer to Zay Flowers rest of the season. I need to see it a few weeks or maybe even 1 week before we start to boost him back up the rankings. Darnell Mooney and then Michael Pittman Jr. All of the wide receivers for the Indianapolis Colts are going to be put in a better situation with Joe Flacco, so got to feel very confident in that. And that's why I put Josh Downs starting off this C tier. Then we got Ladd McConkey, who had an absolute breakout game in Week 8 fantasy football. J-Mos is suspended, but was pretty much being a dominant level, alpha level wide receiver before the last few weeks happened. So definitely got to still be considering him. DeAndre Hopkins continues to make moves up the rankings, and not only from last week with the Chiefs edition, but what we saw last week in the limited snaps. Got to feel good about DeAndre Hopkins here in the E tier. Jacoby Myers, JSN, and then Khalil Shakir. And rounding us out, I think we got 2 more tiers here with the wide receivers. We got Keon Coleman continues to make a push up the rankings for me. Cedric Tillman also made a huge up rank in the tier rankings, which makes me feel really great about where Cedric Tillman's at. Calvin Ridley, Xavier Worthy, Romeo Doubs, Cortland Sutton, and Wan'Dale Robinson here in the F tier. Move on to our last and final tier, C tier. We got Jordan Addison, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and Christian Watson. I want to see a little bit more consistency from Jordan Addison. Of course, we've seen Rome in flashes be super productive, but this is kind of how I see the wide receiver rankings. Like I said, guys, these are my rankings, throwing them down for you. There's a little bit of analysis happening, so I understand if some of you guys want some more. So if you got a specific question about a specific player, ask me down below, and I will help guide you on some of my thoughts. Now we move over to the quarterback rankings, and we got Lamar Jackson, we got Josh Allen, we got Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Jordan Love. And hopefully you have one of the top 4 guys. If you don't have one of the top 4 guys, I mean, Joe Burrow and Jordan Love are holding it down for you there too, but I want one of these top 4 Konami quarterbacks. I think the debate could potentially happen between Jalen Hurts and Jaden Daniels on who should be quarterback 3. I'm still continuing to rely on Jaden Daniels. Arguably, you could maybe make the argument that it should be above Josh Allen. I know there was a little bit of that scare last week with the ribs. Definitely considering that discussion, but I feel very confident here in the S tier with my quarterbacks. We move on to the A tier. Kyler Murray, we still like that upside. The Russian Konami quarterback, but honestly, this A tier started to disappoint just a little bit. Kyler Murray still sets it off for us, then Brock Purdy, but CJ Stroud's been a little bit of a disappointment, and especially with no Stephon Diggs, we're still waiting on the return of Nico Collins. It's not looking super hot for CJ Stroud. Jared Goff, Sam Darnold, and then Patrick Mahomes, who if you drafted Patrick Mahomes with a top 4 round pick, you're not feeling the absolute best by any stretch of the imagination. We move on to the B tier. Caleb Williams, number 1 overall quarterback, has started to really pick things up, so I had to lead him off here in the B tier. Matthew Stafford, getting Cooper Kupp, getting Puka Nacua back, only going to help his overall fantasy football value. Dak Prescott's been a little bit of a letdown this year, but the Cowboys have always been a second half team, so we got to put that into perspective. Drake May continues to make pushes up my rankings. I honestly wanted to put Drake May at the beginning of the B tier, but I had to hold myself back a little bit. We got to see it a few more weeks, especially with him getting back to being healthy. Tua Tagovailoa coming off that concussion, and then Kirk Cousins in our quarterback rankings. And rounding out our quarterbacks, we got Geno Smith, Bo Nix, Baker, Aaron Rodgers, and Trevor Lawrence. Sadly, A-Rich is no longer in our rankings. Maybe you could make the argument that Joe Flacco should be making an appearance in this tier, but you got a lot of guys. Geno Smith has kind of been struggling. Bo Nix continues to make a Konami quarterback push up the top. Maybe we could make the argument that he should be in the B tier as well. Baker with no Chris Godwin, with no Mike Evans. That's kind of how I'm viewing the quarterback situation. And moving on to the tight end landscape, I know a lot of y'all are going to say Caleb George Kittle deserves to be tight end 1 over Brock Bowers. Like I said, this is rest of the season. This is how I see it playing out. I want Brock Bowers still as my tight tight end 1, but George Kittle is my tight end 2. He passed up Travis Kelce, passed up Trey McBride. So for all of y'all, we got it. We're fine. We're going to make it work here in the S tier for tight ends. Our A tier is going to be David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, Kyle Pitts. Feel pretty good about where this is landing rest of season. In our tight end landscape, we move on to the B tier and maybe make the argument that Tucker Kraft and K. Dotton being the clear guys. If K. Dotton has another great week, we could be potentially looking at moving him up, especially with the lack of target competition for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tucker Kraft, K. Dotton, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, Cole Kmet, Dalton Kincaid. I still feel very good about all of that. And then we move on to our last and final tier. We have the C tier where we got Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, Hunter Henry, and Pat Freiermuth kicking it off. So if you like fantasy football, if you like winning, hit that like and subscribe button. Appreciate you guys tuning in for the rest of season rankings. Check out these 2 videos if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.